Good evening, all New Jerseyans on this wonderful spring day that we're having here in the state. And welcome to the Walk, Bike, Ride New Jersey Gubernatorial Candidates Forum. My name is Meishka Mitchell, and I'm the president and CEO of Emerald Cities Collaborative, a national nonprofit focused on climate and economic justice. I am also the chair of New Jersey Futures Board of Trustees. And as a proud New Jerseyan hailing from the city of Camden, I am honored to be tonight's moderator. I'd like to thank New Jersey Future, Tri-State Transportation Campaign, New Jersey Bike and Walk Coalition, East Coast Greenway Alliance, Trust for Public Land, and the Circuit Trails Coalition for organizing this conversation with the candidates about their vision and plans for equitable, safe, active transportation infrastructure and reliable public transit access for people of all ages and abilities in New Jersey. As communities seek better walkability, bicycle infrastructure, and transit options in an era of uncertain state and federal funding, the stakes for New Jersey's transportation network could not be higher. So we are anxious to hear from our gubernatorial candidates on these important issues. New Jersey Future invited all of the candidates, both Democrat and Republican, but not all responded or were able to attend tonight. But I'd like to welcome the candidates joining us for this important conversation. We have former State Senate President Steve Sweeney, former Montclair Mayor Sean Spiller, and Jersey City Mayor Steve Fulop. Welcome and thank you all for joining us. We have
Thank
a
you.
series. We have a series of prepared questions that I will tee up and allow each of you an opportunity to respond. So let's jump right in. All right. New Jersey has one of the nation's highest rates of pedestrian fatalities. In fact, in 2024, we hit a record high, the highest since 1988. People of all ages, from children traveling to school to older residents and people with disabilities, are among the most at risk users in the state. And for our communities to flourish, we need to ensure that all people, regardless of age or ability, have the opportunity to get around safely and independently. How will your administration improve roadways and connected paths and trails to create safer conditions for vulnerable users of all ages and abilities to walk and bike? Senator Sweeney, we'll start with you.
Okay. Okay. Thank you. And thanks for having me. Problem with New Jersey, it's an old state. Seriously, we're one of the original. And our roads, a lot of our roads are old stagecoach roads. So they were built, and when development was built up around it, our roads are narrow. So, we're going to have to try to provide some incentives for local governments to widen roads as they repave them where they can. Because again, we're dealing with roads that, we have a lot of curbing, sidewalks. So, we based our roads off of the original roads. That's one of the problems. And like I said, so incentivizing and trying to make it create an opportunity for towns to have some financial assistance to do that would be good. The other part is, Rails to Trails was a great program that the state of New Jersey could absolutely do more of and do better. And the other part is we need to regionalize our planning because a lot of this stuff is done locally and not in cooperation with other communities. So trying to take it and getting it up to where we can work with other communities to plan out to make these trails work is, I think, important. So we have our problems, but the other part is making sure our parks have good bike paths. There are several examples throughout the state where, we have great park systems where people can bike. My brother's an avid rider. He rides like 50 miles a day, and he tells me about the danger of riding at times. So the bad news is we have problems. The good news is they can be fixed.
Thank you. Sean, we'll go to you.
Well, thank you, and thank you all. Thank you for having me on. Certainly appreciate the opportunity and the conversation. Look, I'll just say this for me. It's always personal. I've got the little guys, the 7-year-old and the 4-year-old, and you want them to be able to get around safely, whether that's to and from school, whether that's trying to get down to the park as they're working on, getting to ride their bikes a little bit better here. But all of that is I think, something that as a parent you want to see, and certainly as a state and as governor, that's exactly what I'll prioritize. I'll say this from what I've seen around many of the issues when we talk about it, and I think we do need, space to create safe, dedicated bike lanes and other pieces like that. But we have to be mindful of the fact that one of the major increases in a lot of that, the accidents and fatalities that you're noting is comes from the place where we're seeing increased speed, where we're seeing individuals maybe who are driving a little bit more recklessly or carelessly. And all the data shows us that we actually want to try to make the roadways feel more narrow, right? Whether that is, and certainly have experience in as a mayor, creating more bump outs, right? Working with our traffic signals for pedestrian only phases or lead times, right? To help make things safer where pedestrians have access and opportunity there, where the vehicles will see them and give them the space they need. It's also ways, though, I think where we can have some less cost intensive ways of making those improvements and changes. That's when you're, repaving and restriping a road, right? You can use some of that striping to help create that presence or feel of a smaller roadway to help slow vehicular traffic, and at the same time, create those dedicated spots. Of course, better if it's got some type of barrier or space between. But I think all of that is that. All those are the tools you have to look at to say, how do we get people driving more slowly? It doesn't just matter when you just change the speed limit from 45 to 25. People will not follow that, right? You've got to physically, visually create these changes that keep people slowing down, give pedestrians, give those on bikes, others an opportunity to not only be seen, but to be able to travel at the speeds they need to safely. I think when you do all of that, you're creating a much more comprehensive way that you're looking at safety. And I think, that's as a state how we have to invest. We have to work with our municipalities to do that. Often there are costs associated with that, certainly for sure. Some of them, again, more expensive. Some of them you can do, again, with some of the just painting and things of that nature. I think certainly we want more people, utilizing our roadways for biking and walking. When you have more of that and you invest more in that, you also get the added benefit of vehicular traffic gets more accustomed to it, right, and slows down and understands that. And the last thing I'd say is we should dedicate the routes that go, especially bike routes and others that go to our mass transit hubs, our train stations, and otherwise. We should add, our those locations as priorities for bike lanes so that folks can take those to the next form of mass transportation that we'd want to see, which is a train or maybe a bus or whatever else. So that folks can utilize there. So I think you look at all that together, and that's how you get safer streets. We've got to invest in that, and we work in partnership.
Thank you for that. All right, Mayor Fulop, how would your administration go about creating those safer conditions for users?
First, let me say thank you for having me. And I'll just preface my comments real quick by saying I'm going to stay on until I can't. I have a meet and greet at around 7, and then Sheena Collum will just pick up the mantle from me and continue kind of talking about our policies, if that's okay. Let me talk a little bit about kind of complete streets, because I think that there's no administration in New Jersey that's kind of leaned into the concept of complete streets more than Jersey City, kind of thinking a little bit about that roads are not only for cars. We need to really have the mentality about moving people via pedestrians, via mass transit, via bikes. Now, in Jersey City, we have created the largest bike share program in the state of New Jersey. We've done 25 miles of protected bike lanes. We put Jersey barriers there, so it's more than just drawing lines on pavement, really thinking about how to drive fatalities down and making the infrastructure safe, that if you build it, they will come. And we've seen more and more users because we've built out a comprehensive network around this. We were the first in New Jersey to do Vision Zero 6 years ago. And this year was the first year that the state of New Jersey adopted that same protocols and procedures that we did. Vision Zero is a commitment to drive traffic-related fatalities based on data down to zero. And we were actually in 2022, the first municipality in the country of the top 100 municipalities to achieve the goal of actually driving traffic-related fatalities down to zero. We've taken crashes and fatalities from 10, 11, 12 per year to 0, 1, or 2 because we've done a lot on curb cuts, speed bumps, thinking through the data on how to change kind of the entire feel around streets in order to make sure that we're thinking about how other people might move around other than just thinking about cars. Now, New Jersey can do the same. There are plenty of streets that are statewide streets that today have none of those resources that are necessary. The commitment from the state of New Jersey today is 10 intersections to do in the year 2025. That's woefully inadequate, if you want to know the truth. It should be an aggressive process to take as many intersections. They should be doing hundreds per year to drive down traffic-related fatalities and make our streets safer. The one other thing I would tell you is that you need to have a conscious investment in mass transit. And when you talk about complete streets, you need to be coordinating a commitment around mass transit along with the mentality of complete streets, that cars are not only the things that should be on streets and be safe on streets. If you think about the turnpike widening, we stand alone saying that we will cancel that, the $12 billion, and reallocate that towards light rail expansion. And the reason I say that, because if you're thinking about making your cars, your streets safe for pedestrians, you need to be investing in mass transit as well. You need to be investing in bike infrastructure. And I would just say that there is no municipality in the state that has the track record on this that Jersey City does. And I would go further to say that there are very few, if any, municipalities in the country that have our track record of our administration around this specific issue.
Thank you all for that. I think we've heard your commitment, and certainly from complete streets to road diets to trails to transit, and all of those things will continue to come up in this conversation. I would say that the next topic is one that is close to my heart, as I worked on planning and development of a waterfront trail network in the city of Camden for many years. Off-road trails suitable for both walking and biking provide recreational opportunities and transportation routes for residents to confidently and safely get around without having to mix with motor vehicles. However, New Jersey's existing regional trails, such as the DNR Canal Trail, which is part of the multi-state East Coast Greenway, and the Circuit Trail network in South Jersey, they do not reach many parts of the state and are often disconnected from other trails. New plans for the Essex Hudson Greenway, a North Jersey trail network, and expanded trails in South Jersey could form the basis for developing a contiguous statewide trail network. So I have a two-part question on these trails. Will your administration support the development of a statewide trail network? If so, how? And what plans, if any, do you have to improve trail funding and planning in the state? And we will start this time with Sean.
Great. Well, thank you again. Listen, the short answer to the first one is yes. We obviously want to support that, right? For all the reasons you just described, we want to make sure there's border connection, et cetera. Look, you mentioned it even in your preface of your question, and appreciate the work you've done, right? It's about connecting a lot of these things. A lot of these conversations are happening locally at the county level. And at the state level, we need to make sure we're looking at a broader master plan, right? I think that's what we're missing in a lot of areas right now, to how we connect these pieces, where we can broaden, where we can invest as a state, to make sure that we're filling in the gaps, right? I think we are uniquely suited to do that at the state level. I think there's opportunities when we talk about, how we work in public-private partnerships, right? Especially when we see, many of the entities around these trails that will benefit, right? They'll benefit, their economies around the areas do better. We know that there are more opportunities in terms of start points, end points to these additions that we do. So I think there's opportunities to get investment there as well, as we constantly look for additional funding sources to kind of help move these things forward in a faster way. Look, at the end of the day, especially though, when you talk about, I guess, the second part of your question, which was the funding, right? I think we see over and over again that the conversation has just gotten a little harder, right? It's gotten a little harder when we see what Donald Trump, Elon Musk are doing, right? They're pulling dollars away from many of the things that we're going to talk about here tonight. Quite frankly, any of the forums that we're on, right? They keep pulling money away from, and we keep having the same conversations, varying issues of how is the state going to make up for these dollars to continue to invest in these programs. So yes, it's through the investment of the entities that will benefit around. It's through public-private partnerships. It's through investing in a coordinated way with local and county governments. But it is going to take us at the state level recognizing that if we're going to truly invest state budget dollars in expansion, in programs that we know are going to help reduce fatalities, and all of the things that we're going to go down and have conversations about today, we're going to have to be aggressive. We're going to have to be aggressive about getting every single dime of the dollars that they steal from us at the federal level to give themselves massive tax breaks. We're going to have to change New Jersey's tax code, and we're going to have to get those dollars to be able to reinvest in New Jersey, right? There is no way we are making up for this with cuts around the edges and the fringes here to be able to fund the programs that we need. Every single thing that we're focused on here is being starved of dollars at the federal level. New Jersey's at risk of losing anywhere from between 22.5 and 26.5 billion dollars from the federal government. I'm committed to making sure we change New Jersey tax policy to invest these dollars. We're not going to make up from it. I appreciate it, but I've heard it. We're not going to make up from it just taking it all from surplus. We're not going to make up for it just taking it all from other parts of the budget. We're going to have to be bold and aggressive, and that's how you get the dollars to fund what we're talking about in the second part of your question.
Thank you. Philip, how about your administration?
Well, let me start by saying that yes to the first part, and my track record is commitment to trails, to bike lanes, to paths. I was at the forefront of the Essex Hudson Greenway conversation. I have a commitment that I will fund that because I think it's a priority, connecting Montclair to Jersey City. I think infrastructure and bike lanes and paths in South Jersey, obviously important. Sheena, who is my partner, is a planner by trade. And I think that the most important thing in order to do this effectively is to have a comprehensive plan for the state of New Jersey on this. Let me just say something about funding, because I don't think that this conversation is about Donald Trump and cutting funding and what we need to be doing. I think it's actually a conversation specifically around this, that the dollars are there. We invest billions of dollars every year on turnpike, parkway projects, year after year after year. You just look at what New Jersey puts out to bid. The priorities today are focused on cars throughout the state of New Jersey. And the governor needs to realign those priorities to focus more on mass transit and focus more on mobility, not only cars, to have, like I said, a mentality that thinks about how do people move not only in a car-centric world. And I think that's something that we've done very well in Jersey City. And I think that Sheena has been committed to this. And I'm just really excited about the opportunity to do it to the state. If track record is indicative of what somebody will do in the future, I would put my track record against anybody in the country on this specific issue. And I'm going to turn it over to Steve Sweeney, but I just want to say to all the people here, I wanted to jump on for a little bit, but I'm going to pass the baton over to Sheena for the next couple questions, if that's okay. Okay?
I just have a question for you, Steve. How do you keep this thing focused when you're driving? I'm holding my phone. You look real good with it.
I'm parked in a parking lot, and it's like propped up against the window, Steve. It's like, yeah,
there you go.
It's on. Look, I'm using these Elmo bars for my kids as keeping it kind of like up.
That works. That works.
Thanks. All right.
Tricks of the trade. All right.
Okay.
So just Sweeney, your response.
Obviously, I think we would all support a state plan. It makes sense. Again, I said this earlier. The problem is we don't plan as a state. So bringing counties and municipalities together, it's easy to figure out the routes. You know what I mean? We have the technology to figure that out. It's more getting the cooperation from other governments to make sure we create these. And, I have to say, when we talk about turnpike widening, they're turnpike dollars. They're not DOT dollars. They're different dollars. I mean, they're all dollars, but that's what it goes for. What we're talking about is looking at transportation dollars differently. Honestly, it's got to be more than roads for cars and trucks. We have to use these dollars and bring bikes into the equation so that we can have more transportation than just, funding for roads and trucks, because it's multimodal, honestly, it's that simple. But the bike riding has never really, the bike pass has been talked about, and, we tweak it a little bit here and you do a little bit there. It's never been the priority that it should be. So I think we really need to include bike paths in our DOT funding plans.
Thank you, Steve. I just want to take a moment to make sure we we have with us now South Orange Mayor Sheena Collum, who is Steve Fulop's running mate, who is taking over for the rest of this conversation. So welcome to this discussion. Uh, our our next question, we get right into where we are, is the transportation sector is the largest source of greenhouse gas emissions in New Jersey. In response, the state of New Jersey has prioritized decarbonizing the sector through electric vehicles. Many other states are also investing in bills to reduce overall vehicle miles traveled, improve public transportation, and expand protected bike lanes and trail networks to enable residents to get around without creating emissions, thus improving the air quality in the state. What steps will your administration take to align climate and transportation policies and funding? And we will start with you, Mayor Collum.
So this is actually the background that I used for another event that shows like the healthy New Jersey and where we're headed. Wait, hold on, reverse, where we're headed if we don't start to get our priorities aligned in the way that New Jersey should be leading. I think the first thing you need to solve for is the safety of roads. You've heard a lot from Steve Fulop about his successes in Jersey City, but I'll point out that most municipalities look more similar to mine in that 75% of them have less than 20,000 people. And there is a lot of land, rural areas that we need to actually improve the roads first before we jump into electric scooters. I don't want in my community on electric scooters on dangerous roads. So I think first and foremost is going to be the investment in the infrastructure to actually get the roads there. As it relates to the municipal funding right now, I would say that when we do the applications to the Department of Transportation, everybody seems to get a little bit. I would say for my town, it's always going to be $300,000 every year for whatever.
Mayor Collum, it looks like you are
And I think you need to
freezing
improve
quite a
the
bit.
trying to achieve community.
Sorry.
Oh, am I?
Yeah,
Is
you
that
were,
me or you?
if you could go back about 30 seconds, I think, and repeat that. We missed a little bit of your response.
Oh no. Okay. So what I had started saying was that the communities that are more like municipal level that look more like South Orange or Montclair have a smaller footprint before you can even have the conversation about the electric scooters and the modes of transportation is that the roads have to be made safe first. I think also there's a connection to the ways that we look at our schools and the ways that schools are undergoing intentional integration programs. So you have a lot of students who are going to schools that are not their actual neighborhood schools anymore. And so in order to effectuate their safe routes to school, the Department of Transportation should be focusing the earmarked money that come to municipalities every single year around the safety of the ways that people commute to and from, whether it's work or school, and also prioritizing and incorporating what that looks like for biking. I think in our community too, it's fantastic because the parents now are also taking all the children on their bicycles in order to get to school. So it's like the bike bus and creative type of ways that communities are looking at pedestrians, road safety, and utilizing bicycles and other forms of transportation to get to and from where they're going.
Thank you. Steve, how about you and how you will align climate and transportation in your administration?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear that.
What steps would your administration take to align climate and transportation policies and funding?
Well, clearly we have to improve our transportation system. The gridlock that we have here is creating a very unhealthy climate. So, aligning, again, we have to expand where there's gridlock. And like I said, I look at, I'm sorry, I'm having a hard time hearing. I'm hearing myself right now. But can you give me the question again? I'm sorry, because I was getting
That's
something in
okay.
my ear.
Sure. What steps will your administration take to align climate and transportation policies and funding?
Well, like I said, one, improving our roadways so that we don't have the pollution that we have right now, and better planning of our roadways, honestly, focusing on how we can make things work better.
Absolutely. Thank you. Sean, how about you?
Yeah, thanks. Listen, I think this is a moment, right? This is a moment where we have to lean into the fact that New Jersey absolutely needs to be a leader in the fight against climate change. I think all too often we talk about things separately, right? We talk about the cost to get something done, but we leave out the other side of that equation, right? To say it, I mean, as a math teacher, as a science teacher, but certainly the same concept where we leave out the fact that as a mayor, I'm sending the fire departments to pump out basements year over year when we're supposed to get those storms every 100 years, right? We're seeing that when folks are rebuilding, they can't afford the insurance because it's now so high to protect their assets, right? Because we're seeing climate change, we're seeing wildfires in New Jersey, we're seeing the cost of not doing enough right now. So when we consider everything in total, we also have to consider our solutions in total as well, right? So working together, when you say, all right, let's tie together climate, let's tie together transportation, these are goals of areas where we need investment, but they are linked, right? We need to invest our dollars as we move towards the green economy, as we invest in improvements to our electrical grid, as we move to invest in improvements to NJ Transit. All of the things that we're talking about here, they can build, the dollars can build off of one another to make sure we can accomplish more than one thing. Probably, best example, I remember Montclair when we moved forward with, energy aggregation, residential energy aggregation. One of the goals was, right, to make sure we had more renewable energy, but also save residents dollars, right? Combining some of the things that we wanted to get done, and using the opportunity to kind of bring more people into that conversation, more of our residents, right? In our case, 40,000 into that conversation to say, hey, we're supportive of this. We see the financial impact, but we also are doing something good for the environment. Let's tie these pieces together. It's a broader conversation right now when I'm out there talking about housing that's affordable in every community. That's important if we want people living closer to where they're working, right? And being able to get there with less of a carbon footprint. That's going to be an important piece of it. If we're talking about making sure there are recreational opportunities, we talked about the trails before and the pathways, et cetera. Having those throughout the state connected more closely to individuals that they can take advantage of, where they don't have to travel greater distances to get there, can do it more safely. Connecting all of the things as one conversation allows us to again make more bold solutions and us to continue to lead, right? Whether it's Governor Murphy's 2035 goal that we've talked about, we see a lot of people wavering on that right now. We've got to stay as committed to that as we are about investing in our transportation because the two are linked.
Thank you. And let's shift gears just slightly to micro mobility. So, micro mobility options like electric bikes and scooters, they're an affordable and accessible option for families to save money on gas, avoid the stress of traffic and parking by leaving their cars at home or not needing a second car, or for people who don't have cars at all. Increasing travel options not only improves the accessibility and affordable of transportation, but it really does help everyone. And we've seen this deployed in many areas of the state. But what steps will your administration take to expand micro mobility opportunities for those who don't have access to personal cars? And how can the state help to make that accessible and affordable to lower income residents for the purchase of electric bikes and scooters? And we will start with you, Mayor. Oh, sorry, we're back to Steve Sweeney. We will start with you.
Okay, well, micro mobility is already here. Obviously, scooters, electric bikes are much more reachable for people that are financially challenged. But, I see it. I see it a lot around even where I live down in the southern part of the state. But it's not the safest form of transportation right now. It's far from the safest form of transportation. So I believe we need to really make bus routes more, enhanced bus routes to make it easier for people that have the scooters and the bikes so that they can actually, get around. Because right now it's dangerous. You know what I mean? It's very dangerous. So it already exists. It's here. So, better planning, which sounds like a broken record, but planning fixes a lot of problems. So, thank you.
As a planner by trade, I can second that. So we'll
Yeah,
go with Sean.
Yeah, thank you. Well, listen, I think it's important to, look, always talk about that. We need somebody, right, in the governor's office who's kind of getting this, feeling this, living this, and certainly, we know the ones getting driven around into Wall Street are not worried about this. The ones, who are never having to take that scooter aren't concerned as much. But when you're seeing it from folks who are relying on this, right, where they have to do it in many instances, it's not just something, for pleasure, et cetera. We've got to make sure there's access points. So what do I mean by that? First, at our points, our end points, or wherever that may be, right? Folks are riding this to get to a train station. They're riding this to get to another location. We've got to make sure we've got the infrastructure in place at those locations where they can leave their scooter, where they can leave their e-bike, where they can maybe charge and be able to have a sense of comfort that when they get there, it's got what they need and they can continue to move on and hopefully take mass transit to wherever they're continuing to go, or if it's at their final point, their destination. So we've got to invest there. I would also say this though, I don't think we can assume that everybody, just because it is more cost effective, can afford on their own. A lot of people want to take them intermittently. A lot of people will need to rely on some type of shared use or something else in that. I know in Montclair we had looked at that in terms of working with companies, around, like many communities have, scooters and other things that people can rent for short periods. We've got to address that also, though, in terms of, where are the docking stations go? How do you deal with, some of the focus on where they can be left, et cetera. We can clearly create framework around that and we get through those issues as well. But it also makes sure that folks who are using it, maybe not regularly, but have that access as well, should they need it, when they need it. I think it's also, when we talk about, though, the affordability, and this is maybe where I would disagree with what Mayor Fulop noted before, right? I do think Donald Trump and Elon Musk are having a major impact here, right? Because when you talk about the ability for folks to be able to purchase, when you talk about the ability for folks to be able to acquire, well, guess what? A lot of that federal funding that we see is going to programs that were allowing us to invest and see decreases in cost, whether it's electric vehicles, scooters, or it's cars or anything else, right? We're seeing that loss of funding, which is the primary way we make these things more affordable for more folks. Look, oftentimes you'll hear, well, we'll give a tax break or we'll give something else. Well, that's great if you can afford to buy it on the front end, right? And then wait for your tax break. But we've got to bring down those costs, and that means investing on the front end to lower it when someone wants to engage here. I think that's where the state's going to have a role, and certainly I will as governor, to invest to bring those costs down as the federal government is pulling back more and more. So it's creating the infrastructure around this so folks can utilize it. They can utilize it if they happen to own themselves. They can get to their points of destination with comfort, understanding that what they need is there. It's creating the spaces for folks who use it intermittently, and also having access within our communities. And then it's making sure that folks who are trying to purchase or buy are given rebates and discounts at the point of purchase so they can get on the vehicle that they need to get them to work or wherever they're going.
Thank you. And Mayor Collum?
Yep. So I just wanted to reinforce for Steve Fulop is that he has the largest public micro transit network in the country operating now in Jersey City that I know that he is very, very proud of. In the first 2 years, I believe it was, of his bike share program, I think they did over 2 million or so rides with that. And so I think that if you go to his transportation policy on stephenfulop.com, you can see a lot of the successes that are built around proactive planning, design, and the way to get people to utilize different forms and modes of transportation. I love this question. I am actually super, super jazzed for it. I jotted down a few things. The first thing I think we need to talk about is reduced parking ratios. If people only knew how much it costs to have surface parking and even structured parking, you're talking about $25,000 to $30,000 a spot, maybe more now. That money can be reinvested for subsidizing different ways of transporting, yourself around the community or throughout the state. The next part is the name of the game for the next year and the next 10 years is the fourth round of affordable housing obligations. So when you used the term equity, I was like, okay, let's talk about that. Is that you'll hear most of the gubernatorial candidates talk about this should be about transit-oriented development, or more importantly, equitable transit-oriented development. Now I see that there's about 166 train stations that have massive surface parking right now that's being underutilized, can be worked on with the host municipality, with a private developer. You could see a wonderful public-private partnership. I think using your land use, your housing and redevelopment laws, is that you negotiate for these types of things. Every single town can negotiate in their financial agreement with any developer the things that you want to focus on. For some people, it's going to be, maybe it's building a new firehouse, or maybe it's a contribution to the schools. I think one of the items that we need to more aggressively be working on with each of these developers is, we don't want your 2 or 3 parking spots for your luxury units. We want to get down to 1-to-1 ratios, maybe even lower, and we want to reinvest that money into, on-site infrastructure. I think some of the best examples, and this isn't just, a shout out to a private company, but Zipcar, even in my own condo association, is we have an entire lot of surface parking for guests. I'm like, let's sell that off. Let's make improvements in the area that we live, and let's install like 3 or 4 areas where we could have shared ways of using a car when we need one. But otherwise, if we're able to safely walk to a train station, if we're able to safely shop, dine, etc. And I think this is not only about equity as it deals with lower income residents who come into our communities, but as we advance an age-friendly agenda and looking at the needs of senior citizens and the aging population and what they're looking for. While I don't think that may necessarily be the bicycles, it's certainly safe walking. If you think of the connectivity in our communities around these larger scale redevelopment projects and their proximity to shopping, dining, amenities, et cetera, municipal services, I think those can be negotiated more broadly between towns and the developers who are trying to invest and build more housing throughout communities in New Jersey.
Thank you so much. This year, New Jersey passed a first in the nation law to establish a statewide Target Zero action plan to eliminate roadway fatalities and serious injuries by 2040, using proving safety countermeasures like bike lanes and road diets, something we've talked about already. However, the current federal administration has made a point to take a critical eye towards green infrastructure, including bicycle safety infrastructure, freezing federal discretionary grants that have been awarded but are not fully obligated yet. In anticipation of reduced federal funding for bicycle and pedestrian safety projects in the coming years, formula funds and state sources for local aid will become increasingly important. How will your administration ensure adequate funding is available to develop and implement shovel-ready bicycle and pedestrian safety projects in line with the goals of the Target Zero Commission law? And we'll start with you, Sean.
Great. Well, thank you. Well, listen, you've heard me, allude to this before in some of my previous answers here, and I'll just be very explicit here. Look, I am on Zoom after Zoom, in forums after forum, where we're talking about some very important thing that is losing massive dollars, right? I'll say it as an educator, $1.1 billion to our public schools that we're seeing cut. Medicaid cuts, right? Medicare, they're going after Social Security right now. We see where they're coming after election dollars, right? We're not checking IDs. We see that they are, freezing dollars for renewable energies, right? Wind technology, et cetera. Every conversation is very similar, right? The federal government is pulling back. They're starving us of resources. They're outright taking them away from us, and they're going to use them on themselves, right? To give Donald Trump, Elon Musk, billionaires, ultra rich corporations tax breaks. We cannot fund all of the programs that we were talking about here at the state level, important programs, ones that have a huge impact on people's lives, like the folks we want to make sure are taking care of our middle class, hardworking folks in this state. We cannot focus on the goals of Vision Zero. Seeing that in Montclair, understanding some of the things that we can do at a low cost or no cost. Well, there's plenty of them, though, that do require dollars, right? And we were relying on those grants, those federal dollars to help do that work. Those dollars are not there right now, and they will increasingly be less and less of them there. So we've got to be aggressive in terms of our bold moment right now, where we could say, hey, we've got to go after those very dollars. Follow the money. Let's follow the money that they're stealing from us. Let's rewrite and change our tax policy and codes here in our state so that we have the dollars to invest, right? Invest here and in so many other things that I'm talking about, because I think it just doesn't work. A little disingenuous for any of us to be on these Zooms promising every group, right? We're going to invest dollars, which we need to, right? I agree on all of it. but we can't do it with less and less and less from the federal government unless we are getting that revenue from somewhere. This is a conversation around a state budget, how we create a state budget, who we prioritize in a state budget. And I'm telling you, that's why this election is different. Because no, I'm not that guy funded by Wall Street. I'm not the guy funded by the big developers in my city. I'm not the guy funded, by literally the big bosses and everything else, right? This is about centering us, and that means we are going to have to go after the traditionally ones who constantly work out well for it, whether it's a Democrat or Republican in office. That's the wealthy, the rich, the powerful, the politically connected. I'm going to go after them, changing our tax code so we can invest right here in projects that help us get to Vision Zero goals. Certainly in projects that help us invest in terms of rail improvements, projects that help us invest in terms of our green and open space, projects that help us invest in terms of all the things we're talking about, right? It's going to take the dollars to do it. That's how I'll get it done.
Thank you. Mayor Collum, your response.
I love this question as well, Meishka. So I totally agree with Mayor Spiller and what he just said. Looking at what the federal cuts could be for New Jersey and for all communities is that we're going to have to prioritize. And I think the first thing that we're going to be prioritizing under a Fulop administration is vulnerable populations first, especially when we're talking about Medicaid, when we're talking about cuts to schools, et cetera. So as much as, like he said, we want to give money to everybody's initiative, I think first and foremost, we have to be prepared for what's going to happen in the state budget and looking out for our most vulnerable in the state. With that said, I think there's a lot of things that we can do that have nothing to do with the federal government or appropriations that come through them. For example, communities throughout New Jersey spend a lot of money on crossing guards and policing, and as a result of unsafe roads have increased insurance premiums. So there is a cost that we're already incurring that could be better allocated to engineering, planning, and implementation. The next thing that I would say is that it is very, very cheap to be able to work with your either municipal planner or with your consulting planner to look at items that are real pilot projects using cones and different ways to narrow roadways or create paths, at intersections. The term that's used by most people is like daylighting. We have a very active walk, bike, ride committee that looks at just very minor improvements that can enhance the success stories of what we're able to do here. And then the other aspect that I really want to focus on is as it relates to school budgets and the increased transportation cost. I don't know if it's been the same for every other school district. It also seems like, transportation is one of many bucket items that are flying through the roof. Transportation is a massive, massive cost within any type of school district, especially if you have robust busing programs. You can reallocate some of those funds from bringing in vehicles if you're able to get children safely to their schools and their destinations. So the question is, are we investing in the roads and the buses, or do we take a portion, not all of it, but do we take a portion, 20%, 15%, to really focus on safe routes to schools and see how many kids we can get on that bike bus or walking with their friends or walking with their guardians, et cetera. And those are all things internally within a municipal budget, within a school budget, that we can reallocate and hopefully get better results. When you take all three connected, I always want to make the connection between, and I know this is the audience for it, is micro mobility and public health outcomes also, because when you kind of smush all of them together, what are you also doing? What's the net result of it is you're building healthier communities. And when you have healthier communities, then guess what else goes down? Hopefully your health benefits and things of that nature. And that, when you're getting an assessment of how much things are going to cost for you, is that you have better health outcomes, and that will hopefully, benefit your bottom line.
Thank you. Senator Sweeney, your response.
Yeah. First, I agree with a lot of what's been said. I would love to say we're going to do this and we're going to do that and we're going to fund this and we're going to fund that. But this was a bad budget before Donald Trump became president. The think tank that I was associated identified we were going to have a multi-billion-dollar deficit. So now we're facing Medicaid cuts, K-12, pre-K to 12 cuts. To make commitments right now that we're going to fund these type of projects is honestly, it's I don't know how you make it at this point. Listen, I think you get ready for it when the funding is available, that you don't start, you know what I mean? Like, just because I don't have the funding available today doesn't mean I can't be ready to go when funding becomes available. I don't know if you remember the ARRA money that President Obama had, like the President Obama sent to all the states for, shovel ready projects. And we got a ton of projects done. We got a ton of projects done because we were shovel ready, and they had to spend the money in a certain period of time, and we always had something ready to go if they needed a bridge or a road. But the other thing I meant to bring up is, it's great to talk about some of these wonderful ideas of biking and everything else, but not every place is a big city. I got rural poverty down by me. You know what I mean? Where the roads aren't really capable of people riding bikes or scooters, or, what I'm saying? And it's different. And we have no mass transportation either. So, as we talk about the state, how we're doing this, we actually have to look at the regions of the state and see what the different regions need. And I can tell you right now, South Jersey desperately needs mass transportation. We would welcome that tomorrow. So I now that I'm not driving, I'm sitting in the car, I can focus a little bit better. So thank you.
Oh, thank you, Senator Sweeney. I think you teed up our next question perfectly because we were talking about that hot button issue, which is public transit. So, a robust state transit system that connects with active and public transportation costs creates jobs, spurs economic growth, and reduces transportation costs and increases the mobility for people of all incomes, ages, and abilities. So, what plans, if any, do you have to improve funding for New Jersey Transit so that riders who rely on it do not have to face service cuts or fare increases? And we will start, I think we started with you, Mayor Spiller, at the last question. Is that correct? We'll start with you this time, Mayor Collum.
You're going to hear everybody say it, but I want to say it again. New Jersey Transit is such a disaster. Oh my gosh, especially if you are a legislator, if you're a local mayor, if you're anybody in this space right now. It went from summer of hell to spring, winter, fall. They've been all of hell. One thing that Steve Fulop very quickly outlined was, first of all, is that he supports congestion pricing. He's kind of in a lane in and of itself to talk about the ways that you kind of reimagine the ways that you invest in, your infrastructure. And the way that he talks about it also is that New Jersey and New York should be talking about ways where they are, capitalizing on people who are using the roads in order to get that money to reappropriate it back into mass transit. He's also been very clear on the corporate business tax and extending that in perpetuity to make sure that you can bond against that money. I think that comes to, oh my goodness, I think that last time I read about it, it was about $1 billion or so, which was the shortfall for New Jersey Transit. So he wants to see that in perpetuity, is that the corporate business tax is there as a sole funding source to be reinvested back into New Jersey Transit. I also think that when it comes to fare increases, I don't want to say, I'm going to get myself in trouble here, but hopefully Steve will be okay with me saying this. I think commuters are okay understanding that fares go up as long as they have reliable service. What's really tough for families is when there's not reliable service and they're having to take an Uber or they're taking whatever, Lyft back home. And on top of that, they spend the $500 a month, whatever it may be. But then, on several days throughout the week, it's $100 additional cost in order to come back from their job in the city or wherever they're located. And so, and speaking it from the family's perspective of what this means, it's not even just about the experience with New Jersey Transit of, the cost or the fare. there. It is what happens when you're, the sole provider and you have children in daycare. It's very disruptive. I don't know if many people knew this, but if daycares are still, holding on to your children and you're not there on time to pick them up, they might be dropping them off at the local police department. So I see these as all very interconnected, but as it comes to the funding sources, New Jersey Transit needs to be fixed once and for all. I think the corporate business tax surcharge needs to be there in perpetuity, if not increased. And I think that, reasonable riders are willing to invest in the infrastructure here as long as they are getting a reliable service that communicates with them.
Thank you. Senator Sweeney, your response.
Yeah, I also agree that the CBT, and it's something that Loretta Weinberg and I called for back in 2018, was a dedicated funding source for New Jersey Transit. Here's the problem. They didn't dedicate the funding. So what will happen, mark my word, if it is not dedicated, within 3 years, that $1 billion will be in the black hole called the budget, because that's what happens. So we need to constantly dedicate that funding in order for it to be there. Look, New Jersey Transit's been starved of funding and lack of investments, and it goes back a couple decades. You know what I mean? I probably going all the way back to the Whitman administration where investment wasn't made. So making sure they have a funding source, but actually protecting that funding source is important. Last year is the first year the fee came into, just came into life, and the state took it for the budget. It was $1 billion. You know what I'm saying? And the purpose was for transit, and they took it and used it to close a hole in the budget, which proves my point that if not restricted, you'll lose that funding. And listen, I'm all for light rail. I support the Hudson Bergen light rail project. I think it's worthy. But I also want the Gloucester Camden light rail, which I've been working on for 20 some years, to see that implemented. So making sure that we have funding in place to ensure that transportation runs well. And honestly, the system has to be looked at through efficiencies. My son was in Japan a couple times, and he told me, he says, if they're 30 seconds late on the train, they apologize. It's an embarrassment. Well, our system is an embarrassment because it's so unreliable. And I love taking the train. I love taking the Amtrak when I go to New York or I go down to DC. But when you're 2 hours late for a meeting, it kind of makes life pretty hard. So we have to make sure that we provide the funding so that transit's going to run efficiently as it needs to.
Thank you. Mayor Spiller, your response.
Yeah, well, listen, I mean, I'll just, pick up what Steve was just saying there. Listen, I think for average folks, I'm dropping my 7-year-old off at school, and first person I meet every day is a secretary for the school, and she comes out and she's always trying to grab me and telling me about her latest disaster story about riding NJ Transit, trying to get to work, right? So for her, it's about being at work on time or not, or getting home, right? So I think everybody is faced with the challenges that we see in NJ Transit, and I'd say this, I'd break it down into 2 categories, right? I'd put busing, right, in one hand, and I'd put rail in the other. And when we're investing in busing, I think there's the conversation around when we're making improvements to our infrastructure in state, when we're moving towards electrification, when we're getting new buses for our fleet, we can make improvements there that get us to what folks want, which is something that's safe, reliable, affordable, clean, right? And we've got to look at that in terms of how we develop plans around routes and looking at that as well. Montclair, we're an example where we lost one of our bus lines, right? The camp through COVID, stopped providing services. We've got to relook at these lines and routes and determine, how do we efficiently get folks to where they need to go. And we can do all of that on the bus side. I think that's manageable, doable. And you just heard how from a Spiller administration. When you talk about rail, right, we understand that is a much harder conversation. It's a conversation that becomes more regional and certainly a reliance on the federal government in terms of their control of a lot of these lines, et cetera. So I think you've got to do 2 things as you try to make us get towards, again, safe, reliable, affordable, and something that's clean. Number one is you've got to invest the dollars that we have here. And if we're going to talk about things like congestion pricing, New Jersey, first off, I'd say for folks who are like that firefighter, that nurse, others trying to get into the city, I do think there's got to be ways that they can have a savings. We can't try to make New Jersey more affordable, but be taxing them every time they're trying to do what they're doing to help save lives, and go in off hours where they can't rely on transit. But I do think for the ones who are paying that, we got to work with New York to say, hey, the best way to reduce congestion is investing in NJ Transit, right? Investing in our systems of mass transportation so that we can have more folks who don't have to rely on their vehicles, right? That's the solution. So we need more of those dollars, right? We need to be investing those dollars in New Jersey, right? That's where folks are coming in from. So I think it's that conversation. It's, of course, pressing and working to see if at the federal level we have an administration that finally gets around to, infrastructure week. We've been hearing about that for 4 years previously, and I'm sure we'll hear about it for another 4 now, and it'll never come. But that said, I think we can clearly create for folks and say, look, here's our plan. With the dollars we do have to invest, and we know the dollars that are there from the corporate taxes, corporate transit fee, and some of these other pieces. If we do dedicate those dollars, I think Steve's right. When I've met with some of those corporations that are paying that fee, I got to say, they'll say this. They say, look, we're not thrilled about paying it. But what we would live with a lot more is if we knew those dollars were actually going to improve NJ Transit, right? Because folks are using NJ Transit to get to work, to come to their place of employment, which is oftentimes us. And if we knew it was actually going to go there, we could live with that. But it's always diverted. It's never used in that way. If we dedicate those funds and use them, we should be able to lay out for our riders here in New Jersey, here is what we can do with those dollars year over year over year. Here are the improvements you can expect to see. Here's the timelines in which that's going to happen. And we'll give you updates on what's occurring when. In addition, while that is occurring, here are our contingency plans. Here is how we are going to communicate it to you. And here are your options that we're going to make sure you can either get to or from wherever you're going in a way that you know in advance and can quickly get informed of if there is a problem, again, on a system that we don't fully control. Lay out our progress, lay out our goals, lay out if we're meeting it, lay out our contingency plans, work towards it, keep leveraging at the federal level and regionally the dollars we need to go ahead of those goals and make greater advancements. And of course, on the bus side, utilize that comprehensive approach of what we invest as a state to make the improvements on both fronts. I think you do both of those things, you can make meaningful changes, and people will be very appreciative that they finally see us making the investments and the progress that they want to see, so they know that eventually the challenges that they're seeing will get better. The challenges will get less and less and less, and their experience will become better and better and better.
Thank you all so much for this wonderful conversation as we've talked about increasing the access and mobility for all of New Jerseyans, whether we're talking about those big cities or small cities to our rural areas to our smaller suburbs. And we want to just give maybe like 30 seconds to a minute for some final words from you all, and then we will wrap it up for this evening. And I will start off with Senator Sweeney.
I'm sorry, you were freezing up on me. What did you say?
Oh, I'm sorry about that. I was just saying we are wrapping up for the evening, and so we're going to give an opportunity for some final words.
I first thank New Jersey Future. They are a great organization that I've had the honor to work with for quite some time. And you bring very valuable perspectives to the conversation. And transportation is huge in this state, but I'd like to say it's one state, but it's not one transportation network. And we have to work in improving to make sure that all parts of the state are served. Because right now it's not. We joke about not having transportation in the southern part of the state. And I'm not talking Cherry Hill or Camden, I'm talking the southern part of the state. And we need to make sure that there's access, because without access to transportation, I would say rural poverty is a lot worse than urban poverty, because you can't get there to get the job to get out of it. So again, thank you, New Jersey Future, and thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak.
Thank you. Mayor Spiller.
Yeah, well, thank you again. Appreciate everybody for being on here. I'll just say this, this is an example of engaging in our democracy, being part of a conversation. We have the unique opportunity, right, with crowded primaries on both sides. You get to hear a lot of the candidates' opinions and views and vision for how we'd like to move forward with New Jersey. I'll just say this. I think as we have the conversation tonight, I hope what you take away from me is this. The pieces that we're talking about with each of the individual questions, they're all connected. It does mean we have to have broad conversations with all of the stakeholders to bring forward the ideas that we can move forward within a challenging environment where we see less and less dollars at the federal level, and certainly more restrictions and more challenges to the very things that we know can move us in the direction that we've been talking about tonight. I'm committed to doing that. That's the kind of work I have done already. I also know this, though. This is that moment for bold action to get somebody who's fighting for us. And when I say fighting for us, it is oftentimes very easy for folks who are not facing some of these same challenges, right? It's a convenience to talk about something as opposed to a necessity, right? To get that ride, right? It's a convenience to talk about, having something that's reliable versus a necessity, right? These are, I think, who is usually leading this state. And for me, it's about centering in every decision that I make a focus on working class folks who are struggling in so many ways, and folks who the system just doesn't work for. So it's as much about policy and important pieces there. And you've heard my bold actions around policy, New Jersey tax code policy to be able to fund the things we're talking about. So policy is important, but it's also about who's talking about it and how much we're going to follow through on that commitment. And I think when you look at everybody who's running in this race, we've got folks who are funded by and supported by the same usual ways that we always see folks who run for office here in the state, politically connected to big money, the dollars that oftentimes when that phone call comes causes them to hedge on the improvements that we need to make, the changes that we need to make. So we need to change systems as much as we need to change policy. And the first system we need to start with is changing the way and who we elect to serve. So I thank you for, again, being part of this. I hope for your support, and I know ballots are out, and certainly June 10th is right around the corner. So I'd love your support in that way, and hopefully with your help, we'll be able to enact the changes that we need to make the improvements that we're talking about tonight. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And Mayor Collum, last words.
Sure. So given that this is the end of a political forum, please vote for Stephen Fulop. I am asking for every one of your votes. I want you to, if you're voting by mail, if you're early voting, if you're voting on June 10th, go to stephenfulop.com. He has the most extensive policy positions on every single topic you can imagine, from transportation to sustainability and the environment, affordability, housing. It's all there. This is the way he's been running his campaign from the very beginning, was to be the most thoughtful candidate on public policy and direct executive experience with implementation. So please vote for Stephen Fulop. The next thing that I would say is, in closing this, is thank you, New Jersey Future, the Tri-State Transportation Campaign, New Jersey Bike and Walk Coalition, East Coast Greenway Alliance, the Circuit Trails, and the Trust for Public Lands. One thing that I hope to bring to this conversation, and that many of our members are on this as well, is I'm the executive director of the American Planning Association in New Jersey. So you people are my jam. You are some of the most talented people who understand public policy, implementation, what works, boots on the ground. And year after year, I see you testify in Trenton only to get no results when you are subject matter experts. What you can imagine will happen without any doubt from a Fulop administration there's not going to be political cronyism, nepotism. I want my best friend in cabinet roles, etc. Is that he is going to bring the best and brightest minds in all of the fields around land use, around transportation and mobility to the inner circle in order to rely on your expertise to make New Jersey better for all of its residents as it relates to this topic. Thank you so much.
All right. Thank you all for everyone for participating in this wonderful forum. Again, to our candidates, to former State Senate President Steve Sweeney, former Montclair Mayor Sean Spiller, Jersey City Mayor Steve Fulop, and running mate South Orange Mayor Sheena Collum. Thank you all for joining us again this evening, and to the organizers of this wonderful event, New Jersey Future, Tri-State Transportation Campaign, New Jersey Bike and White Coalition, East Coast Greenway Alliance, Trust for Public Land, and the Circuit Trails Coalition. We thank you all for joining us. Vote, and see you all soon. Have a good evening.
Bye-bye, everybody. Thank you. Bye.